The stock market has already crashed. Wall Street and world governments are simply pretending it hasn't. Do you remember the story of The Emperor Has No Clothes? It's a Danish fairy tale written by Hans Christian Andersen in 1837. In that story, everyone knew the emperor was naked. He knew it, his regime knew it, the people knew it, but as long as everyone pretended that he wasn't, then everyone could try to continue as if nothing was different than usual. This metaphor has since been used to connote, among other things, collective denial or ignorance of an obvious fact. Yet try as they might to pretend otherwise, he had lost his shirt, and by following his example, soon everyone else had lost theirs as well. This was their new normal. You can sense something is off, can't you? Let's run down just a few of the things I've noticed. The empty store shelves, the tens of millions of unemployed, an unlivable minimum wage, run-amok consumerism, the housing crisis with seemingly no end in sight, ever-increasing inflation with goods and products almost doubling in price, not to mention certain companies taking advantage of that inflation acceptance to raise their own prices, the massive bailouts to banks and Wall Street to the tune of trillions back in 2020, retail businesses all but disappearing. 70% of the workers in America are millennials and only own a paltry 2% of the country's wealth. And 61% of Americans can't afford a $1,000 emergency. Increasing rates of homelessness, poverty, drug use, and despair. The probability of global war increasing every day. A pandemic that will never end. A crypto market filled with people trying to claw their way out of poverty, and those who take advantage of them. The obvious in-your-face corruption of the healthcare industry, gas and oil industry, pharmaceutical industry, news media, and political space. Everyone, whether they say it aloud or not, feels that things are spiraling out of control. It's like a derailing train in slow motion. Everyone sees the emperor has no clothes, but no one says anything. No one is doing anything. The reality of our social and economic structure does not match that which the media reports and the stock market claims to be at. These social and economic systems are moving only on inertia, propped up on government cash injections, tax loopholes, and a refusal to let its inevitable conclusion occur. It's an entire industry built up on nothing, supported by nothing, and is going to crash. And when you try to explain it to people, they go, "But how could that happen? After 2008, didn't they do something to prevent this from happening again?" Right? Most people unfortunately don't get it. When they crash the economy, they get bailed out. And then they use that money to pick up cheap stocks, foreclosed businesses, and struggling competitors to increase their overall market share. While the rest of us have to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, an impossible task literally created as a parody of how impossible a feat it is. You can't lift yourself up by your own bootstraps, and the irony of how that phrase is used today, unironically, will never not be funny to me. The stock market crash in 2008 never ended. The bill for it was kicked down the road. The solutions to it weren't implemented. The painful process of correcting mistakes and sealing up loopholes was simply ignored. The crash in 2020 wasn't solved either. In fact, Wall Street and the major banks were injected with $14 trillion over 14 days to stop the crashing. This along with numerous bipartisan bills to bail out all those struggling corporations. Meanwhile, regular people got a few measly stimulus checks and some assistance for some of the 40 million people who lost their jobs. This wasn't an act of kindness. This was to prevent an outright revolt and total market collapse. The poors have to have at least a little bit so they can buy our stuff. Never too much though. If they could have paid us less, they would. Sometimes you have to acknowledge there's a problem, and America is really good at pretending there isn't, even when it's obvious to everyone else. This super bubble is going to decimate not just the financial world, but the livelihoods of hundreds of millions of people worldwide. I don't mean to instill fear, but you can't look at what has been going on for the last 20 years and pretend that everything is fine. This isn't a right or a left issue. Both parties are to blame. It's the extremely wealthy, well-connected, and powerful versus all of us. A useless Senate sitting on 400 bills passed by the House, refusing to even have a vote on them. All the while, inefficient, ineffective, and uninspired presidents have held the White House for decades with little to no progress. Every problem is simply a new can to kick down the road. But eventually the road ends, and we have to deal with all of those problems. Why have a little pain now when I can simply push it away and let someone else in the future have a lot of pain? This is the game that the United States plays. The best we can do is look out for each other and prepare ourselves personally for when this super bubble pops. Because at the end of the day, they know it's coming, and they have already cashed out, moved around resources, countered with puts and calls. They're prepared. Are you? Let's just hope that when all this falls apart, we can, for once, use a bad situation to better our country and our world by helping those that need it the most, instead of falling into the repeated historical trap of authoritarianism. Let's hope we can punish the ones that did this, change the laws to stop this from ever happening again, force out corruption, as this is the obvious result of that, and establish a better world that takes care of everyone. It isn't an impossible task, not when we all come together, but as long as we are fighting with each other over M&Ms having different shoes and other stupid nonsense like that, it won't get better. Anyone that talks in seriousness about that kind of stuff, you should stop listening to them. To surmise and wrap up all of this, I'd like to say it isn't all bad. Yes, things are awful, and they will get worse before they get better. But like I've said before, it isn't all bad. We are living through a time that a lot of us like to call the Great Resignation. A beautiful moment where people are finally standing up to awful and unlivable jobs and saying, "No, I'm not doing this." In our lifetime, wages are lower than they have ever been, while productivity is higher than it's ever been. And if you listen to the news, all of them say that this is awful for the economy, and that there's a labor shortage, and that people are just being lazy. But that isn't true. None of that is true. It isn't awful for the economy, because paying people more money means they're going to have happier lives at the cost of a massive corporation making only $23 billion this year instead of $24 billion. That's a great trade in my opinion. And as for the labor shortage, that's nonsense. Would you work at McDonald's for $200,000 a year? Yeah? That's because there's a wage shortage, not a labor shortage. People want to work, but people don't want to work full-time at a job that doesn't pay enough to even pay rent, obviously. As for people being lazy, no. Workers aren't lazy. They're tired. They're overworked, underappreciated, and underpaid. And thankfully, tons of them have finally said enough is enough. Remember, the wealthiest 10% of American households own 89% of US stocks, meaning the stock market is astrology for the wealthy, nothing more than an indication of rich people's feelings. So has the stock market already crashed? In my opinion, it died and crashed a long time ago. And in an effort to prop up that wealth concentration, we all pretend like it hasn't. But when it does, when the stocks go up, they get unbelievably rich and we get pennies. And when the stocks go down, they get bailed out and we lose everything. The emperor has no clothes. Not just the emperor, but the entire empire. The empire has no clothes, and it's time to acknowledge that. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I know it's a little bit different than the usual content I make on All Time Scary, but it's still scary. It's just a different kind of scary. Unlike things changing thanks to the Mandela effect or the internet being taken over by malicious bots and for-profit algorithms, this is something entirely different. The fact that a decimal point moving too many spaces could cause an entire economic collapse is almost unbelievable. The worst part of it is that the vast majority of people that will be hurt by a market crash are regular hardworking people. They will lose it all, and not just in the United States of America, but all over the world. Their savings, their homes, their retirements, their investments, their jobs, their towns decimated. I suppose the one benefit of millennials and Gen Zers is that we collectively control so little wealth that when the super bubble does pop, most of us don't have very far to fall. This was supposed to be the end of the video, but there's just so much to talk about around this topic. We could talk about how $1 trillion was wiped out of the crypto market just the other day. $1 trillion, as in $1 million. Or how January was literally one bad day away from the worst January on record for the stock market. All signs point to market crash, and the point of this video, before anyone comments saying it hasn't crashed yet, is to point out that the stock market is a zombie. It's been dead a long time, and the propping up of it by cash infusions in the tens of trillions of dollars isn't going to save it. It's as though it's dying from a horrible deadly disease that's rotting it away from the inside and the out. And someone covers it up in makeup and puts a wig on it and dresses it up real nice. You could probably hide it for a while from some, but you can't hide it from everyone, forever. My next video is the Dead Internet Theory 3, which is written, recorded, and in the process of being edited, so look forward to that. Click that like button and subscribe to the channel right now, and until next time, never stop searching.